quite as often as I should have.
We're on, we're live.
Maybe I didn't hold you quite as good as I should have. And if I made you feel second best, girl, I'm sorry I was blind. But you're always on my mind. You're always on my mind. We got to pay a little homage to Willie Nelson every now and then.
All right, all right. Congratulations on that. Very nice, exciting. Well, here we are. We're live, and the crew is on board, and we have a great guest today. And let me just do a quick hello to everybody and sound check. John, how are you today?
I'm doing fine. I'm going through the pandemic and looking at all the surrounding things and trying to have the imagination to make sense out of it.
All right, all right. Llewelyn, how are you today?
Roughly the same. I'm fine. I can't make any sense out of anything. And things have changed a lot since last week in that we've had the October surprise, and it wasn't what we were expecting.
Right, right. And Scott Hinson, how are you, sir?
I'm doing as well as I can, considering I have no idea what day of the week it is. Right.
Well, I think as we were saying earlier, that this is like a Groundhog Day on steroids. It's all a big blur. Can't really figure out what's up or down, morning or evening. It all looks the same. So Scott Hinson is the Chief Technology Officer at Pecan Street, and which is one of those dear things that I had the opportunity to conceive long time ago. And Scott is a superstar that have made it real. And Pecan Street is a company that focuses on the management of and monitoring and control of data, behavioral impacts on that data, primarily around infrastructure, buildings, smart buildings, energy, water, all kinds of things like that. And really the tsunami of what John loves to talk about, social physics and how data is going to be everything and end all be all. So we'll have a big data discussion. So Scott, thank you for being here today.
Well, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So let me go through some of the highlights, and then we'll get into our talk. So COVID death continued to climb. Another 4,000, almost 5,000 folks added as of mid-morning today. We're on 209,560. One death is too many. At the number, it's keep climbing up, and hopefully we'll find a way to slow all this down. The cases are up about 300,000 from last week, so 7.4 million in change. And interestingly enough, an interesting data point on COVID, New York City has enforced permanent opening of the dining outdoors. I'm not so sure what that means in the winter, but apparently everybody's going to be going outdoors with their equipment.
Hot dog sickles? Is that what that is? Hot dog sickles?
Exactly. So I'd love to get your guys' feedback on that. Stock market is slightly up several weeks in a row. We're at 28,000 on the Dow, or 13,000 New York Stock Exchange index, and then on the NASDAQ we're at 11,000. Oil crude prices are up $1.30, and so good for production of natural gas and oil. And the gas prices in Greater Austin are at $1.61, 3 cents down to multiple weeks in a row. Who would have ever thought that a gallon of gas could be $1.61 in 2020? Anyway, so John, what do you think? What's happening? Where are we at on COVID and the soft opening and football and stock market and the economy and all that? And two data points that I highlighted late. We added 661,000 jobs in September, and unemployment fell down to 7.9. So John?
I think with COVID, we're learning to live in the science. So, you know, as Americans, we like to live in the science with data. We like to understand when something happens, why did it happen? Maybe we didn't have the information. One of the things that we do know is that although it is still out there, we are more likely to live in the science now. What that means is that there are more masks, and we know that masks, every little bit helps. We know that there's a more concentration on how we dress and what we do. We listen to the science about the COVID being perhaps airborne rather than being on the surface. But as we learn to live directly in the science, we still have the other side that's not paying much attention to the science. And I think there's also the human issue of just being tired of something. You know, we can get tired of something, just run back into the war. But I do expect an outbreak as we open up because of the science. I expect that in a few weeks or so, we might have to shut down all again, which would be devastating. So that's the first thing. So you look at all of the science and how we appreciate science. We're trying to live in the science, but we're also living outside of the science. I was looking at the GDP this morning from my broker, and it's up about 2.4%. But what's really down on the negative side is interesting, is the business spending. That is the kind of enterprises that really buy stuff, that's sort of on the negative side. And of course, the stock market, as we know, as long as you have to put money there, you got to put money somewhere. It'll go up and down, but it's gonna really, really boom. I think that if you look at what's going on, if you look at the sports, and you know, you just wonder why we just can't do I don't know if the right thing, but the scientific thing to get rid of this thing to get us where we need to be. Because one thing is certain, given the political atmosphere, it is a competition between now science and knowledge and good old no knowledge and the American can-do spirit. I find that very, very interesting going forward. So you compare the science and then you look at what Americans think. Whether it's my friends who think maybe it's just another flu, and then there's the scientists saying there's something else. And we know everything would depend upon getting this rattlesnake out of America. And from an international point of view, we have not done as well. So now I think where we are it's a fight with science. And it's interesting because when the country was founded, of course, it was supposed to be founded on the basis of science rather than any kind of ideology or religion, I might add in those days. So in a real sense, we are back to our beginnings, looking at science, seeing where science would take us or not take us.
Yeah. Llewelyn?
Well, I really should pause because John has done such a brilliant job and summed up everything I think. He must have been reading me.
I read all the time.
But he is absolutely right. The thing that we must look at is the enormity of the president getting COVID-19, of 14 senior White House employees being felled, or at least, if not felled, being testing positive. This is seismic change. This is something that affects a lot of people who had thought the president was telling them something true when he showed public indifference to masks and to the normal or to the precautions that doctors have recommended. One of the first events, one of the first consequences of his getting sick and the spread in the White House has been that the gray vote, a lot of people of age who had voted for him before have lost confidence, and now look, according to polls, and I don't believe anything until the actual day of the election and now days after when the votes are counted, but this is a big change. And you see how skittish the stock market is. I agree with John totally. We're putting money in the stock market because there's nowhere else to put it. But when he said there would be no stimulus package till after the election, the stock market died. He jumped back on and tweeted something more positive, and it came up. The market is skittish. People are not sure. This is a very uncertain time. to go along with the great boredom most of us are suffering. We're also suffering considerable anxiety for the future and what it holds. I personally tend to think that come this winter, there's going to be a tsunami of misery that is going to hit rural areas, poorer suburbs, and the inner city. People will not have work. They will not necessarily have any money to pay for anything. We see that in the large number of people lined up today at food banks. You know, we're now two societies, those that have permanent income or reliable income, and those who work, usually hourly workers, or those in anything to do with the hospitality trades who are out of work, and it is unclear if and when, or if ever, they will return to those jobs. It is a precarious time for them going into winter when we can probably expect a surge of infections.
All right. Scott, how do you see this? How do you see the digital transformation that COVID is pushing, and is it impacting you, your customers? What's going on from your cockpit?
I'm muted. Well, I mean, a couple of things, right? So, like on a sort of macro scale, going back to John's comments about science, I think that there is a grand reckoning in and relearning of statistics and exponential growth for a lot of people. Like I have had, even with relatives and things like that on social media platforms, they're like, oh, it's not going to work like this. I'm like, there is nothing that stops this math, right? Like this is fact, right? So from an energy perspective, you know, on a micro scale, and the things that I do on a day-to-day basis, the shifts in usage in homes was for our participants, and this goes back to what Llewelyn was saying about basically sort of if you have the means, you can social distance quite well, right? You know, in the week after shelter in place was ordered by the mayor in Austin, electric vehicle charging by our participants dropped 80%. Wow. So that is, you know, and we monitor those circuits. We know second by second if the car is charging or not. And it has been rebounding, but it has still not come back up to the level that it was, right, before shelter in place was ordered. So that means there's just less interaction. Well, that's for folks that are able to do that, right? They're able to, like I am right now, able to work from home and still get their job done. The point is well taken for the folks that can't work from home, that we have to do something different. Yeah, very interesting. It's truly you know, a journey of uncharted territory, and I continue to see though an incredible amount of activity on digital transformation and how the world is accelerating. And clearly COVID has really created a chasm between the digital you know, influence of monetary making world and the one that is not digital. And so, you know, so one of the things that we track here, Scott, is the whole notion of telecom and 5G and where that's going, and what are the tell signs of that. And so in the last 7 days, Intel announced a new strategy of product line around something that they call VRAM for a virtual runtime access network for 5G. And Intel trying to get into that business. They have made some acquisitions and some divestitures, and they're really not into the chip business per se on the handsets or on the towers, but clearly it's all about the cloud and accessing the data in the cloud. And so that's where Intel runs strong. And so they're about to announce an entire new product line that they call
They basically announced it as a product line that will unleash 5G goodness globally. And so more to come from Intel, but I'm sure that they're cooking
Very
something.
tasty 5G goodness.
Exactly. France just completed 5G spectrum auctions and raised $3.3 billion. Australia is investing a boatload of money on 5G around Industry 4.0. And ABB just launched a new virtual innovation platform for smart buildings. So, as a ultimate technologies, Scott, what's your take on 5G and IoT and that coming very fast at us and taking us from a few billion things connected to hundreds of billions of things connected? How do you see that impacting what you guys are doing, the value prop? Where's that going to go?
So on the electrical energy side, I'm assuming there's going to be an impact, right? Because there's always the physical access. There's always the physical access quandary, right? Can you get a Wi-Fi signal? Can you get an Ethernet cable to it, right? And things like that. And of course, 5G would aid that. If there is, once we crack both the physical access and the power management portion of it, I think you're going to see, and pardon the pun, but the floodgates open for water and natural gas and soil carbon sequestration monitoring, all these other things where data can be intense, but there's two issues, right? The issue of how do I get the data out, right? Physical access, and then how do I power the sensor? And so pair those five.
Give us a context for the audience and the listeners. Give us a context of what happens today in a non-5G world at Pecan Street. How many data sets are you managing?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
And where would that be if it was 100x? What does that look like?
Gotcha. So let's say that, for water monitoring, right? We developed a device that sits on top of a dumb water meter and turns it into a smart meter. But it depends on the residential broadband connection backhaul, and it depends on batteries, right? And so it's got a, somewhere between, depending on how much you run water, because every time somebody turns on water, it turns on, somewhere between a 4 to 10 year battery life, and data access for it somewhere in the 80 to 90% range. And so that's great. But if we were able to sit there and just put something that was 5G and we wouldn't have to worry about getting a signal out of there and things like that, all of a sudden we could do a bunch more in terms of water conservation, things like that. Now, our device is still that much better than the old school, which is the one guy walks down the street with a stick and lifts the lid, right? And reads that meter once a month. But there's still gaps in even our best data on that side. There's still gaps that I would love to fill. And 5G has this potential to fill all those gaps, or at least a majority of them. And for us, that would make a big difference in terms of pairing the electricity with the water and usage patterns and things like that for disaggregation purposes and all sorts of stuff.
So how much data is it today? How much data could it be? How many gigabytes or petabytes or?
I mean, I just got off the phone. We're setting up some interviews for some podcast stuff. I just got off the phone with some folks that worked with us on day one years ago when we were working with TAC on initial data imports, and we had this big laugh about data size. Like, we were so excited back then when we were getting 24 data points per home per minute, right? And now we get 10.5 million data points a day per home, right? Like we used to walk around and be like, here's 100 homes worth of data for a year, and you'd hand somebody a thumb drive. Well, now you have to hand them a hard drive, right? Or two. and so I have no idea where it would go. Again, we're going to have to relearn exponential growth, right? I mean, the potential is there. Now, having all that data and doing something super useful with it is always the part where, you know, like we want to get all the data in the world, but then if I don't turn around and do something super useful with it, what have I done, right? I've collected a bunch of data, but I haven't done anything.
Yeah. John, anything?
Yes, I know, you know, Scott, we go back to the great, I guess it was Silver's book, The Signal and the Noise. You know, since the beginning of time, we've been trying to separate the signal from the noise. You know, in the old days, in ancient Greece, they would burn a goat. If it went one way, if the smoke went one way, it would go the other way. In finance, we have lots of noise. In physics, which has equations that dead pipe sense. So you're exactly right. We're going to have a lot of data, and we're going to need people to understand what's the signal and what's the noise. So I guess my question would be, what are we trying to predict? In finance, we're trying to predict the performance of the stock market. In the weather, we're trying to predict the performance of the weather. And nobody can write an algorithm better than I can in trying to understand these things. But we also know that there's a lot of noise in the algorithms. So if we go back to Silver's book, The Signal and the Noise, what will we be looking for in the future? What will be the signal? And how can we make sure that there is no noise in the data that we get back, or the equations, the regression coefficients that we get back? And how are we going to determine, which a problem we've had since the beginning of time, especially ever since, you know, computers came and way back when we're doing it by hand, how do we separate the signal from the noise? Do we need a theory of how things should work? Are we looking for a certain kind of prediction? What's the signal and what's the noise? We have a lot of signals, but the question is how much of it is noise?
I mean, for our work on residential energy usage, right? It is the change that we're trying to drive is carbon emissions reduction, right? So anything that I can do, and there's two ways to do that, right? There's generate the electricity cleaner, or don't use as much, right? So and no matter what else you do, it probably falls into one of those two categories, right? And so, but you know, the utility grid, all of these control decisions are being made sort of at a grand centralized level. But if we all start turning into producers of energy, we're prosumers, we're producing and consuming energy. These control algorithms that they've got start to, and even control structures that they've got, voltage tap changers and things like that are all assuming power flows one way. And if you flip the power around the other way, they may get very, very confused. And so the idea of signal to noise for us isn't so much the issue yet. It's you took it back to these control structures and even being able to understand the different data coming at you at higher velocity than ever from different sources.
Let me ask you another way. Andreas is looking forward to when there are electric cars everywhere. Will they not be polluting in some sense of the word? Do we have enough data to say now? And we just had a panelist who said there's a whole lot of data and a lot of noise. I mean, someone who's listening to us. But isn't it true that we really do not understand what the impact of multiple batteries would do on, quote, the environment? So we talk about clean energy. Do we really know from the scientific point of view? Do we have the data that if every car is battery, if airplanes are battery, if we're making batteries now that will run cities, and of course we will make a battery that would not have to be charged for an automobile, is there a possibility that that will also create pollution in the air? And we might be right back.
I mean, you always have to look at the life cycle of these things, right? I mean, you just do, right? The production of lithium ion can be quite bad for the environment, depending on exactly how the various rare earth
are different for the environment, different.
Right, yeah. But it's in a different way, right? And so and trust me, these challenges are not unique to electrification of transportation, right? Like sometimes be careful what you ask for, you just might get it, and then all this other stuff. Like electrification of transportation, you mentioned the batteries, but there's also, infrastructure changes. If you converted a whole bunch of 18-wheelers and you needed to charge them in the 4 to 6 hours that they're idle while they're being loaded and unloaded before they get back on the road, right? All of a sudden that becomes a transmission level system problem in the state of Texas. That's not an AE problem, that's an ERCOT problem, right? In soils, we talk to groups about carbon sequestration in soils because we view it as an IoT problem as much as anything. And they talk about how various soil practices you can sequester carbon, but if you accidentally in those soil practices release nitrogen products, right? Oops, that could be worse. So you have to be careful what you ask for and look at the system holistically.
Mm-hmm. Llewelyn?
I'd like to ask Scott a couple of things, and also to say that I'm so on board with this idea expressed by John and Scott that we need a holistic look at any new system. Just moving the weight of pollution from the left foot to the right foot is not a solution.
Right.
No.
I wanted to ask you about battery charging. There was a division of opinion when electric cars became really viable, and that was whether batteries should be treated rather like the renewal for your propane for your grill, as when I lived in Virginia for the home heating. Whether they should be interchangeable and you should simply drive to a station or a shop and trade in one battery for another battery. But it seems that we're going the other direction. We're going to the charging point direction. Is that going to exist? Is that going to be the way we're going to go? And the other question is, if we monitor water, can we be more efficient as a result in its usage? Many cities are right on the edge of their water supply. Washington, D.C. is one of them. In drought conditions, Washington is in trouble. We need to conserve water, but also to monitor its usage and possibly control its usage more efficiently. We control electric usage, obviously, with time of day pricing, etc. Is that what we're going to see with water when we get it finally analyzed and when we get enough data coming in from water supply points?
Okay, 2 questions. Let me make sure I get both of them. Because they're all right, here we go. So as far as the batteries, I really do think that we're going to end up with the majority of the systems being charging stations versus battery swaps. The labor intensity for the battery swap is pretty substantial, right? I mean, that's a business model that has been tried in multiple places. And Andreas, you follow this more often, better than I do. I don't know of any that still are operational. There might be one in Europe, but I don't think so. Like I think that one has pretty much, the market forces have decided. If you're going to sit there and wait 20, 30 minutes for that battery to be swapped, but you can charge it in 30 or 40, and that's a 1-person operation instead of a 4-person operation, that's what you do, right? And so I think that's going to be the way to go of it. And as the chemistries are getting better and better in terms of internal losses and degradation for fast charging, because that was always the knock, and it still is the knock on fast charging, is that like if you do standard electric vehicle charging, you get so many X number, but if you do fast charging, you've dropped it by 20%, the total amount of coulombs that you can bring in and out of these things, right? So as that gets better, I think the trend will just continue, that's a more economical, better way to do it. Now, as far as water goes, right? It's been our experience for both electricity and water that data access alone only works so long for conservation messaging, right? Like if you give somebody their electricity
data or their water data, there will be an immediate behavioral change. They see it, if they understand what they're looking at, they go, oh my gosh, I can do better. But the data itself, by itself, is not enough to force that change to be permanent, okay? The water and the electricity just frankly aren't that expensive enough, right? Like you're not finishing your dinner and then taking the china and just smashing it every day because you can't afford to replace it. But leaving the faucet on while you're cleaning the dishes and just let the water run, we can afford to do that. There's nothing substantial in terms of a penalty for us to keep going on that, right? So what I'd like to see, and this kind of gets back to John's point of the signal and the noise and being able to make a decision, is if there are systems in place for automation of conservation efforts, that would be helpful. Now, exactly what that looks like for water, I've seen some things for irrigation. I've seen some things for leak detection, because like if you go and ask a water utility, how much water do you lose? A lot of times they'll say, yeah, we think we lose about 20%. Like they know what came into the system and they know what they billed for, and there's a difference, right? Like it just goes, poof, gone. And it can be more. And so there's a lot of low-hanging fruit there. We just need to be able to make sure that we can act from the data to fix the problem, either those leaks or change the behavior. And how that's signaled yet, especially for water, I don't know. Water is really tough because where the water comes in, you rarely have power, right? Water and electricity, they tend not to run those side by side for very good reasons. And so it's tough.
Yeah.
Andres, I'm going to ask a question, but also look at the comment from the gallery. I think that's interesting about China.
Sure.
You know, Scott, when you look at all these signals, I also think about the legal profession. I think about the increase in lawsuits. I think about the increase in data that we have to bring lawsuits. I have a friend in Houston who lost a cell phone. He said, John, do you have a cell phone? I said, yes, sure, I have a cell phone. But you can expect a divorce in about 3 years. Why? Because when you on the stage, John Butler, where were you on December 5th? Well, I was playing golf. No, John Butler, you were at your girlfriend's house in Austin, Texas. That is a lot of the data that they rely on. So I think going forward, as we look at all the signals that's coming out, and if we look at the building of buildings, if we look at automobiles, if we look at water, when something goes wrong, I think that we have a system to protect people. And I think that legal system will really kick in on the signal and the noise. What do you think about that? I mean, applying the legal system to all of the data that we have.
We actually look at it as data is going to become a utility by itself. Like data as the next utility, right?
Well, Andreas have a thing for data. He has an economy for data.
Yeah, I mean, and so there's going to have to be a whole reckoning of the legal rights around that. And as an engineer, not it. I don't want to. I don't want any part of that.
Okay.
Let me pause us. Hold those thoughts. Let me do my sharing of the screen, doing my quick commercial on Digital 360 real quick. As you probably seen that we had a great Digital 360 Summit 2020. And we had some phenomenal speakers, including Scott himself and John and Llewelyn. And these are the companies that were there with us on the podiums and on the panels speaking, very engaging. And the videos are coming out. I think that we will start posting videos next week on all the keynotes and all the panels. So hang tight on more information on that. And then just to remind you, the Digital 360 Summit 2021 will be May 18th, 19th, and 20th at the Embassy Suites in San Marcos, co-hosted with Texas State University. And I want to thank Texas State University for being a sponsor of the Digital-Roundtable. So Scott, tell us real quick about perhaps one or two new projects that you guys are working on that are kind of telltale in terms of what is the interest of utilities or some of your customers? You're working with all kinds of places, you know, universities and cities and things. And well, tell us a couple of projects maybe that you can share in terms of helping us understand, are people getting savvier, wanting to invest more? Are you guys busier now or less busy than you were, you know, a year ago, 2 years ago? Where do you think are things going? What kind of work are you guys getting involved into?
We're doing a lot of field trials for, I don't even want to call it demand response because it's become so much more than that. We're doing a lot of field trials for using shiftable loads within the residential structure as a true service. So we're doing a program with University of Michigan funded by ARPA-E, where they're actually looking at, for the techies in the audience, they're looking at using basically like pulse width modulation control, forcing air conditioners on earlier than they would be typically from the temperature set point, not by enough to make the occupants uncomfortable, right? But just enough where if they have enough of these loads, they can start to get an energy signal either up or down so that they can follow the reg up, reg down markets, right? And I mean, like, if you're looking at following a signal that's got a sort of a second level or minute level time scale in terms of up, down by this much, right? The idea of using an air conditioner, which is maybe on 2 or 3 times an hour, wouldn't necessarily be your first choice, but the controllers that this group has selected has the ability to sort of be sliced and diced, right? So we've developed, because the timing constraints to follow that signal are so tight, we've actually developed very low latency. I mean, we're talking like 100 millisecond latency hardware that updates them on the status of what the air conditioner is doing. And then can intercept and impose a new control signal on the air conditioner. So that's an exciting one for us, right? That's pretty cool. And they're using our data to build a simulation, and then we're going to do. I think the program's goal is to simulate like 1,000 homes and then actually do it in 100. So 10% is actually, you know, hardware in the loop actually being controlled. And so we're going to be doing some stuff there. We've also got another program that is just starting. The field trials for this are in a couple of years with Eaton. And this is actually going to be some stuff where a lot of the control signals are being sent and created by the smart meters themselves, which we've talked about this for years, but there's not a lot of it actually going on, right? And so that's really exciting to actually, you know, I mean, how many years now we've been saying, well, you've got this computer on the side of your house, which also happens to measure electricity. Now, it isn't always the most powerful computer, right? But it's there, and it could be very useful in doing something. So we might as well make it do something. And so that's what this program is hopefully going to do. So yeah, so we've got a couple couple cool ones. We've also got work in, as I mentioned a couple of times, in soils, where we're looking at trying to find real fast if we can put some AI, machine learning type algorithms with the data sets that exist to make them useful. But the soil scientists are not necessarily data scientists, and the data scientists are not necessarily soil scientists, right? So we are trying to do our best to sort of be that interpreter for both parties, because they say, well, we have these problems and we have all this data, and these folks say, well, we don't know what the data they have and what they're trying to answer. And we're like, okay, well, let's everybody talk. So that classic sort of academic partnership that we've been so successful at over the years. Where that goes, I have no idea, but we'll find out.
Yeah. Well, Scott, you know, in my case, it's just so statistics. We said, we're going to do a master of statistics. Oh, nobody do that. Let's do a master of data science. Okay. We're going to do a master of statistics. Oh, okay. Well, let's do something else. So I want to ask you this question. Do you think that all of that data will be tied together in one data set? That is, or will they be siloed? So, and you know, I'm always seeking data from my PhD students, and quite frankly, I'm doing the social physics stuff and writing equations about the movement of people, which I would like to talk to you about after. So do you see a database that's tied together, much like the database of Facebook, for example. So when I do research now, Scott, I can go to LinkedIn and scrape the variables that I need. And remember, the purpose of Facebook, their business model, is the selling of data.
Right.
I think we must understand that. So do you see any time where all of these signals will be tied together in one gigantic base?
I mean, there's going to be consolidation of these data sets, right? Like we're constantly trying to consolidate the data sets. One of my least and it's just like this is a flaw that I recognize in myself. Like I hate some of the buzzword that develops around these things. Like the term smart grid drives me bonkers. Like I'm like, well, what smart grid? Where is it smart? Where is it not smart? Like it gets used as this envelope that anything can be put in as long as it has electricity and a computer, right? I'm like, no, this is not how it's
jump on Andreas. Don't jump on Llewelyn. I mean, he created it.
Well, he was nice enough to have me on the show, so I'm not going to say anymore. And then the other one that's driving me bonkers right now is data lake. Like, I get it. I understand it. I understand what they're trying to say is that if you can put these things that are supposedly disparate, but what's ending up happening is that everybody's like, well, we'll just solve it with a data lake. And you and I both know, John, that like machine learning is also statistics, right? Like we can't separate these two. The fundamental math is there, right?
It's all regression toward the mean. I mean, come on. And I didn't do particularly well in statistics in college, so it's very painful for me to study it now. And so you end up having this perception that if we just had the data, we'll find the answer by applying these algorithms that we may or may not understand. And nothing can be farther from the truth, right? So while I want to see this data brought together, your point about signal of the noise, it needs to be brought together intelligently and in ways. I was just talking with somebody from TAC. His name is Paul Navratil. You probably know him. He's a great guy. And he was talking about an example of, and I'd heard this before, where they were trying to train algorithms to spot missile silos. All the training sets for the missiles which was the good ones, and I remember this with tanks. I'd remembered a slightly different example, but all the training sets for the missiles were nice clear day pictures, and then when they were trying to see if the algorithm worked, the tough pictures were cloudy pictures, right? So effectively, the algorithm never found missiles. It told you what the weather was in the photo. So you can't just depend on this black box magic to give you your answer. That's not going to happen. That's you have to have a theory. It's like, and even the old regression equation was they were all learning equations. They were all algorithms.
Yeah.
So I think so. But I think it's going to be very interesting. And Llewelyn keep reminding us that as we move farther down this road, that the divisions in society will grow and the noise will grow. And the question is, what will people do in the future?
Well, that's right. That's the very question. Thank you, John. And I want to ask Scott, what are the social applications of data beyond efficiency in business or efficiency in a certain undertaking?
Besides yelling at each other on Facebook for politics?
No, how do you reach down into communities and make data of value to them, either by learning about what they need or in some way giving them an access they don't have at the moment?
Yeah.
That would help to stave off this coming divide between the literate and the illiterate, the numerate and the...
So in other words, is behavioral analytics a real thing?
That's a good way of putting it, yes.
I mean, I don't know, right? Like that's not my expertise. I do know that we have in our data sets that we're constantly trying to remove, we have biases, right? Like we talked before.
Mm-hmm.
The folks that are volunteering for our programs in California, in Austin, in New York, tend to be professors and engineers and lawyers and doctors, right? And so we would love to do more programs around equality and understand that. We're also trying to launch programs around air quality and health. We realize that we have a unique, when we put our systems in to measure energy, at the same time we go in and do that, it's not that hard for us to add a sensor pack that we've developed to measure indoor air quality. So we've got CO2, CO, and particulate count, temperature, humidity. So we can look at it both from a comfort and a health perspective. We would love to do more around that to find out if there is corollaries between energy efficiency and long-term health. If there's so much that we can, and we know that there's some fundamental ones, right? There's a phenomenal article in the New York Times about heat islands formed by the fact that enough parks weren't put into lower income neighborhoods, and now they run a couple of degrees hotter during the summers. Now they have to air condition more, right? And this has been a long-term sort of impact. So I would love to figure out ways to use the types of things that we collect to spot that and then sort of deconstruct it and undo it and make it more equitable and fair. How we do that, I don't know. I'd love to.
One of the things that we run into I'm a statistician myself, from Northwestern. Okay, one of the things we run into is that if you look at what physics has done, so finance is much better now because of physics. So we have taken the equations from physics and transferred them to financial data. The problem is physics is working with the laws of God, and finance is working with the laws of people, and people will change their mind. So physics could have algorithms that's just 2 or 3 that's really just dead pipe solid. We don't have any of that when it comes to social data because people will change their minds. So I think as we go forward, if we just always remember what the equations are for, and I think that finance runs into problems because the efficient model, the movement of stocks, the Black-Scholes model, it's all based on physics. But physics, they're playing with rocks. We're playing with things that can change his mind. So I think the data will be good, but we have to keep in mind that algorithms do make mistakes.
Sure, absolutely. So let me add a couple points here as we're moving through the hour, and it's a great conversation. So some interesting trends that happened last week on smart cities. Cornell University, with a grant from NSF, has designed the very first statewide IoT network for the state of New York, focused and aimed completely at closing the digital divide that exists in New York State today. I find that very interesting, that again, money is being spent to realize that that's a real problem and we need to solve it. Clearly 5G and other things will help with that, but I think it's an interesting example of how do you, sort of achieve equality and improve quality of living and other things, quality of work, jobs and the like, education. The other trend that is really interesting, the city of Boston just issued an RFP for the very first urban forest plan. So the city of Boston would like to have a forest inside the city limits. They have issued an RFP. They don't know what that means. Maybe it's vertical gardens, vertical forests. I have no idea what it means, but I find that fascinating. And then the city of Los Angeles has released their $400 billion long-range plan, pledging to eliminate all issues with transit in the city of Los Angeles, if you can believe that. They're promising less congestion, and fast, easy rides and shortening times, and it's only going to cost $400 billion. So any thoughts or comments on in a world of COVID around the desire of mass transit, building forests in cities, and eliminating the digital divide?
And let me comment on LA real fast. At one time in the 20s and 30s, LA had the best transportation system in the world called the Little Red Cars. It went all over the valley. It went all over California. There was no pollution. Cars came along and General Motors bought them out and killed them. So this is a return to the future. I'm a Southern boy. I'm from Louisiana. I worry about hurricanes. I don't know what's going on in Boston. And quite frankly, Charlotte, I really could give. But I think that it's pretty wild when you look at how we're trying to reinvent. And it can be done in Boston. Any city that did the big dig, right, can certainly turn Boston into Texas if they try.
I was wondering
I don't know if I'd go that far.
when that particular commercial would be aired. The Texas is great commercial. I'd like to remind you that, or tell you that Louisville, Kentucky has a tree planting program which is very popular. It started as a privately financed, it's operated by the university there. It's a massive tree planting, and they're already getting very good data on the effects, both on the air, but also on health. They're trying to balance, get data which proves or disproves the effect of having local greenery, not greenery in the Amazon, but greenery downtown, and how that works. And I think that's very significant, and I think other cities will head towards it. The digital divide is now critical. It's not a thing of the future. It is now, because education is now depending entirely on the ability of children to sit in front of computers. And if they don't have computers or they do not have Wi-Fi, they will not get any education whatsoever beyond what their parents can do for them. The need to bridge the digital divide is now critical now and present. It's not something in the future. So we need to move on it very quickly. I think the first thing is to see that we don't wait for 5G, see that we get enough kiosks established so that all areas can get Wi-Fi, and then make sure that all the kids have access to computers and can use them. I suspect that if they have them, they will use them. Children are devoted to computers. Only cats like computers.
Scott, any thoughts on those topics?
I can tell you that if you give a kid a computer, they'll use it. Mostly for TikTok videos is really the. But maybe that's just mine and the age they're at. No, I mean the Cornell one. Did that? What was the physical layer on that for the entire state? Does it say? Does the article say?
It's multiple technologies, but basically, yeah, they're basically had a white sheet of paper of if you could start over again and distribute the assets that the state owns to enable connectivity statewide, how would you go do it? So they got a grant from NSF for $1.5 million, and they have published a plan.
Okay. Because I knew that there was some sort of low bandwidth, long range, LoRa stuff that they were doing, and I didn't know if this was an expansion of that. Because a lot of the stuff that we would like to do could be aided by that, right? Like as many data points as we get from a home.
Yeah.
Again, to put my sort of microscopic lens on, right? As many data points as we get from a home. For each individual home, if you compress that data, the total number of bits isn't that much, right? It's not astronomical. It's just that it gets multiplied by a lot of homes. So yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That was it. I mean, like all of these solutions, are that folks are talking to about, increasing biological plant diversity and things like that by doing urban farming and things like that, I think are needed. Absolutely, for sure. Are we doing it fast enough? I don't know, probably not. Like my gut feel, I don't know what I'm basing this on other than worry and concern, right? My gut feels it's probably not fast enough. I'd like to see more now, right? But yeah, I mean, those are all very, very interesting things. I will say that, the Texas not having a particularly effective mass transit, at least at the beginning of COVID, appears to have possibly helped, right? Like you see some articles around that. But you look at the places where there were significant outbreaks, right? And they tend to line up with places where there is good mass transit. Now, whether that's correlation or causation, I think is probably a bunch of peer-reviewed statistical analysis to be determined, and but certainly the initial data seems to kind of point that way. But long term, the lack of those things tends to increase carbon footprint, tends to decrease economic growth, tends to decrease happiness. So while there might have been a short-term benefit, long-term, big picture, right? I mean, I remember as a kid, my dad working for Shell Oil Company in Houston and having a 45-minute commute each way every day, right? So he lost an hour and a half of his life, 5 days a week, to a long commute, and that's not great, right? Like he hated that.
Mm-hmm. So autonomous vehicles with connectivity, Wi-Fi is the way to go in.
If you get more people in them, with masks, I guess, with masks.
That's right.
It looks as though if we're going to have people living in cities, we're going to continue with this sort of lungs effect where people flow into work and flow out. And if you're in New York or London or Paris, it doesn't matter where, Los Angeles, they jam the freeways. We're going to have to think of other ways of moving people. There are some ideas. One, of course, is using airspace for pre-programmed commuter vehicles, electric commuter vehicles, presumably, taxis, etc., that will carry people. So we add another dimension to surface. We go from surface transportation to limited aerial transportation and more underground transportation, whether it is with Elon Musk's boring tunnels, his company is called the Boring Company, or something else, which is over the ground tunnels that have a reduced, in which people are sped very fast from one point to another. They're not entirely in a vacuum, there's something of a vacuum inside. There are ideas, but it doesn't seem that anybody wants to get away from the move in, move out, daily work habits. Now, it may have changed somewhat. More of us are going to stay at home and work at home and work locally. But historically, wherever ideal conditions have been built with the idea in model city, work and living are going to be in the same place, it hasn't worked. I used to live in Reston, outside of Washington, an ideal community. Everybody thought they'd work there and play there. It never worked out. People were still spending an hour a day each way to go into Washington or to go over to Maryland. People seem not really to mind commuting. It's a strange thing, but they don't seem to mind it. I've always not minded it if I could do it on public transportation because I could read. I resented it driving. There was no good value in driving besides getting to your destination. And I agree, like Scott's father, that was a terrible waste of time. One reason I left Washington was I got tired of the commute. But we still haven't overcome the fact that people don't mind commuting and actually like the interregnum between work and home. They don't actually like living too close to where they work, it would seem. I don't know what the data on that is.
Any thoughts, Scott, on that?
Well, in Texas, we consider your car like a horse. It's a culture thing. Yeah, really. We had, we could drive up to a shopping place and there was just blocks and blocks and blocks of parking. And
Right. Well,
one of the bad things about here is that, and where I'm from, to in the Bayou of Louisiana, I mean, a car is just like a horse. You can just jump in and you can park it anywhere. As parking decreases, then we need to look at other kinds of transportation. And I think
well,
that
I mean,
people move for opportunities. Llewelyn is right. I mean, if you live in Ruston, you see another opportunity in New York, you'll commute to New York from wherever. But I think culturally, in something like, you go to the Wild West in Wyoming, I mean, the less the dense, of course, the more the horse, is what I'm saying. And then where I'm from in Austin, our tradition is, let me get my horse and run up to the store and come right back.
Well, and let me just add that the other attraction of the automobile is that when people get into an automobile, they're home. They have their music, they have their stuff, they maybe their snack food. They're semi-home. They feel comfortable. Public transportation, they don't have that same sense of comfort in having gotten home when they haven't gotten home at all. And the horse thing is interesting. I, as a lifelong horseman, would like to tell you that horses are great recreation and terrible transportation, John.
That's right.
They make for great pets. So what if the hypothesis was that COVID has unveiled two things? One, the world is never going to be the same. We're not going back to how it was. And remote learning and remote working and remote living is where it's going to be at, which means isolation, and everything is remote, and that changes everything. It equalizes the power of the current concentration of power based on geopolitical location. What would be the impact of that, and would that tear the fabric of society altogether?
I paid a lot of money to go to Northwestern for the networking, 2 + 2 or 4 anywhere you go.
Mm-hmm.
You think that the networking is everything.
Mm-hmm.
And people will find a way to be social. I mean, let's just go back historically. People had to wait until Saturday night to go to the barn dances in the early days. So people would find a way to be social. I would think that we would go back to having local kinds of recreation, barnstorming, local kinds of get together. We do that at Starbucks almost, before the pandemic. So
Mm-hmm.
I think, Andres, people would find a way because we are social beings.
Well, that's right. And remember, one of the things that we're going to have a rewoven society. The fabric of society is going to be rewoven by COVID. And we're not entirely sure how. I must say that I again agree with John. I've agreed with John so much today, I shall probably have to do some remedial reading. It's going to be different. And we can't project anything based on the past because it is going to be different. This is
right.
Of departure to a place we have not been and do not know. In many ways, there'll be improvements. There always are when you get a revolutionary situation. And there'll be some people who will lose dramatically and painfully. Unfortunately, some of them will start their loss this winter, which is sort of where I came in on this broadcast.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank again Scott for spending an hour with us today. And
no problem. Thank you for having me.
We're always enlightened by all the work that is being done by Pecan Street. And I go back to the early days of the conversation of Roger Duncan and Brewster McCracken coming into my office and saying, we would like to do an application to the federal government to do a little pilot called Pecan Street. Can you come up with what this is going to look like and put the whole thing together? And I said, sure, not a problem.
I sent Isaac Barkers now. I was director of IC Square, and I sent Isaac Barkers. Do you remember those days? Yeah.
So congratulations, Scott, on everything you do.
Right.
Thank you for doing that. And you keep using the term smart grid, and I'll keep trying to figure out what parts of that I want to work on.
It's a journey. It's like the keto diet. It's a journey.
Is it just us now? I mean, okay.
No, we're gonna go ahead and take us away with the guitar, and then we'll come back.
Okay.
Bye. Say goodbye to everybody real quick.
You don't even have to ask twice.
Hey,
You'll just do it.
get back on the road again. The life I love is driving cars with my friends, and I can't wait to get on the road again. On the road again, like a band of gypsies, we go down the highway, and we're the best of friends, insisting that the world keep going our way and our way. We're on the road again. Can't wait to get back in our cars again. The life we love is making music with our friends. Can't wait to get on the road again. I can't